Hey, I'm Greek Maria, and I was inside of the Supreme Court during the oral arguments of the TikTok case. Let me give you the behind the scenes, behind the curtain look on what happens when you go inside.
We are in Washington, D.C., right in front of the Supreme Court building, and we have with us Greek Maria, one of our good friends. She's done tons of work in politics, and she was actually inside the Supreme Court when they were talking about banning TikTok. And she's going to give us an incredibly insightful view into what it's like getting in, number one, and number two, being inside the Supreme Court. So tell us, what is it that happened?
Hey, Fabian. So we are right outside right now where I slept all night long in order to get into the Supreme Court. I got here at 6:30 p.m. before the case started. The arguments were at 10 a.m.
So 6:30 the night before?
The night before, yes. So I slept right here where we're standing. I had my chair, I had blankets, and there were a whole row of people all the way down the block. And it was quite the night. It was freezing cold. It was a high of 28 and a low of 18 outside.
Wow.
So very cold, but such a monumental case to wait for. And there were 24 other people in line in front of me, and a little bit of insight into kind of how it works. So the Supreme Court arguments are open to the public, but the chambers inside are actually very, very small. So there's only a limited number of seats where people can watch.
So in that massive building, the actual area where they adjudicate things is small.
Yes,
Wow.
so pretty small, similar to what you might see on TV with the press briefing room at the White House. It's actually really, really tiny. Same thing within the chambers of the Supreme Court. There's no cameras allowed in the Supreme Court. You can only hear the audio recording. So it's really cool to see the justices ask questions, and then the different lawyers get up and actually make their case. So it's really interesting to see the nonverbal cues and just kind of their tonality and their facial expressions when they're actually going back and forth. Very, very cool to see, and not something you get to see on TV.
Wow. So, okay, so you're sitting here for probably 10 hours, 12 hours. 14 hours. And then take us to, so now you're coming this way. If you can get us a tour, a walking tour, I guess you can call it, of the experience.
Sure. So right here is where I was sitting. I had my chair. I actually had to have someone come get the chair before the arguments. Essentially, they hand out tickets to you one at a time with a number on it. So my number was 25, and they hand you the ticket and they whisk you inside. Wow. But something interesting that the media usually doesn't talk about, at the front of the line, I was one of the first people who was waiting in line all night who actually went inside.
Really?
So what happens is lawyers, law firms, people who are interested in the case, they actually hire people to sit outside.
Really?
Yeah. So the first people that were in line were hired line sitters.
Wow.
So essentially what happens, they hand out the tickets usually between 7 and 8:30 a.m. So at 7 a.m., all the people who are hired outside right here, they pack up all their chairs, all their sleeping bags, everything like that, and they swap out one for one. And you can tell because these folks show up and they are dressed super nice. They're wearing blazers and heels, and they look like all the lawyers, and they just start lining up, and then the line immediately shrinks.
Wow. So it's the lawyers pay people to come out here, wait in line, just so that they can get the tickets and be in instead of the actual public that should be in there.
You know, obviously, if you're interested in the case, you do have a vested interest to be in there, and it's like a one-for-one swap. And people are very, very diligent about it. One person in line for one person to swap. But yeah, I was number 25 in line, and I was the second person in line who actually went inside.
That's incredible. That's something I actually did not know whatsoever. That's incredible.
Yeah, so a little tidbit, but actually that's going to go away. So the Supreme Court actually started instituting an online lottery system, and that's going to start in February. So you can go online and you can put in for the lottery for the cases. They'll still have some standing outside, but eventually I think they'll phase it out.
You just told Fabian how you sat out here for 14 hours it was?
14 hours, yeah, all night long in the frigid cold, but it was worth it. It was completely worth it to be out here. History in the making.
And after those 14 hours, somebody came out and gave you a slip, said that, hey, you can actually get... Was there any chance that you would have not been able to go in?
Ooh, yeah, there's actually a huge gamble when you're outside. Usually if you're in the top 30 to 40, you should be fine. There's enough public seats. And I'll kind of describe kind of the back part of the court. It looks sort of like pews, kind of. So the justices are up on the dais, and there's all 9 of them. It's funny, their chairs are adjusted to their height. So each chair is not at the same height, which I think is funny. But the justices are up on the dais, and then the lawyers who are arguing have kind of long tables where all their documents are, things like that. And then they also have all of the lawyers who are supporting the case behind them. And they're all sworn into the court as well. And they go one by one and list their name. And then behind that are a bunch of benches where folks sit. And then the public sits on chairs behind that.
Oh.
So I was next to a huge marble pole, basically.
And you were what, number 27, right?
25.
25. Okay, so you're almost on that border of possibly not getting in. So we're taking the turn after you sat down, you got your ticket and everything over there. You started to walk through here, right? And the reason why we're doing this is because not too many people actually see what it looks like, the behind the scenes, right? They already see the Supreme Court hearing and whatnot. So where are we walking right now? What are we going towards?
So right now we are on the west side of the Supreme Court. We're walking toward the front door of the Supreme Court. Equal justice under law is what you'll see on the top of the Supreme Court and all the columns. But essentially, when they give you your slip of paper that says your number on it, you're whisked away. So they take you from over there in the line and they whisk you over here. And it's basically like single file line. We're going inside. So they take you super quickly. You basically take all the stuff that you have and you have no time to really do anything else. And they take you through actually where we were just walking is where all the media was. So they started setting up around 5 a.m. And I was wondering throughout the night, I was like, where are all these people? But they were kind of set up right along here. And some people were in this little pen here. And
we're actually behind us is finally the Supreme Court.
There it is.
There it is. So, okay, so one thing that people don't actually know is that they don't allow media to actually film it, right? You can audio record it, people are listening to it, but there's no actual filming, right?
Right. So media can't even record when you're in the inside. So there are very strict rules when it comes to going inside the Supreme Court.
Do you know why? Why don't they allow media to actually film the stuff?
Essentially, they don't want filming or any distractions because it really is about the arguments of the case. And it's about the open dialogue between the justices and the lawyers and the people who are actually presenting the case. So it's very serious. There's no phones allowed in. And if you have a phone, they'll take it from you.
Wow. Well, let's bring our phone in. Take us towards, okay, so where did they lead you in? Where do you go? Do you go through these main doors over here? Or is it some side doors? Is it underground, some secret stuff? What's going on?
So essentially, we were let in right through this panel right here. They were kind of opened up. So we went through here. And then we were kind of split in half, actually. So half of us went in through this door right over here, and then half of us through this door right over here. So really, at that point, it didn't really matter which number you had. You just kind of were put into a door, and then we went through security. And of course, you can't have too much stuff because they have you put everything in a locker. You know those little lockers when you went ice skating or when you go to the roller rink, those tiny little lockers?
Or you go to a Dave Chappelle comedy show?
Yes. They didn't have one of those yonder bags for me to put my phone in, but those little orange locks that they have, you had to put all your stuff in the locker, and the police officer comes out, tells you the rules, says if you're not silent, this is not a place for protesting. If you cause a disruption, you will go to jail.
Oh wow, it's like that. Because if you
serious.
cause a disruption in a Senate hearing, you just get kicked out, right? Or is there you
just get kicked out. You might be held or something like that. But this is way more intense than that, and it's because they want to preserve the arguments of the case.
Wow. Do you know if that's happened recently?
I'm not really sure, but they instill in you that you just need to sit there and be silent and listen. It's very, very serious. And you are on the first floor when you get in, so right when you walk in. And then, of course, the court is on the second floor. So if we're looking at the building, the court is actually kind of when you go up these stairs here, the court is through those big doors right there.
Okay.
So that's where the court is. And those big columns essentially are on the inside as well. And I was sitting next to one of them. Now, let me tell you what happened inside the court during the oral arguments of the TikTok case. During the TikTok case, it's set up like a normal court argument. It's not like what you see on TV for sure. It is really a dialogue back and forth. So first up were the lawyers for TikTok. They came up and they started their case. They really leaned on the First Amendment and how it's so important for this app for freedom of speech. And they also leaned on the fact that TikTok Inc. is an American-based entity of ByteDance. And there were a lot of questions about how does this affect ByteDance versus TikTok? Justice Clarence Thomas, he asked a lot about that. He said, doesn't this affect ByteDance? So those were some of the questions coming from the justices. You could see some of the skepticism coming from the judges just about TikTok and some of the scrutiny applied to the case. So I thought that was very interesting to see that back and forth and just the detail of questions that they were asking based on the legal arguments. Really in this case, nobody was really arguing the validity of how important TikTok is to the lives of creators and things like that. The justices actually acknowledged how important that content is. But it was really about the legal basis of what Congress passed and its constitutionality.
Interesting. I did read that I forget which of the justices was asking, is there another place that these creators can go and use their freedom of expression elsewhere while still making money?
Yeah, so that was some of the back and forth that I heard inside of the hearing. And really, that question is something that, I think you and I both have grappled with, kind of thinking about. There really isn't a place quite like TikTok on the internet. There's Instagram and YouTube and all these other places. But I do think that there's a level of community and discourse that happens on TikTok that doesn't happen on the other platforms. Yes. And that piece going away, I think, is really going to hurt the free exchange of ideas.
Absolutely. And
I'm hoping that, there could be some sort of resolution. Of course, the justices have not released their decision quite yet. And we'll see that come to fruition very soon, especially because the ban is coming on the 19th. Although I don't think TikTok will fully go away on the 19th. There are some leverages for a stay if the justices decide that that's an appropriate course of action. It could be that TikTok, they uphold that this is a constitutional act and TikTok does get quote unquote banned on the 19th. And then on the 20th, President Trump comes into office, and he, as the president, could make a 90-day extension.
And that's so interesting because there are so many people, my friends included, who are on TikTok creators, and they rely on that income for self-sufficiency. I have friends who own TikTok agencies who are always in New York at the TikTok offices. It's just no one knows exactly what's going to happen. And I have read, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you were in there, and I don't know if this is left-wing, right-wing media saying this, that they got the idea, or they feel like they will go forward with this ban. Is that what you saw, what you felt?
Being inside, when I left the courtroom, I felt as though ooh, I think this ban is going to be upheld. Just the tone from the justices, especially, so TikTok went first when it came to presenting their arguments. Then the creators who are suing the government, that the lawyer representing them went next. And then the last was the Solicitor General who represents the government. And she was the last to present arguments. And I thought that from a legal standpoint, the justices gave her some points on some of her arguments and verbally said that out loud. Wow. And you could tell that just the way that they were asking questions meant that I think the TikTok ban will go forward.
Interesting. So there you have it. If you've been listening from someone, you've been listening to someone who was inside of this actually happening right in there. You learned how exactly you can get in, exactly what it feels like being inside, what it looks like, the ambiance, how the justice sit, and also how the actual ceremonies are conducted, or the disputing of evidence and things like that. So it's been incredibly insightful. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this anywhere online that sheds so much light into it. So thank you so much, Maria. Can you tell people how to find you on socials?
Yeah, of course. I'm Greek Maria on all platforms. I'm Greek and my name's Maria, so it's pretty simple.